Okay, guys, so I thought I would do something interesting here that I hadn't planned on doing today. So, if you don't know, last year, Doctor Who had 4 specials released. I did reviews for basically all 4 of those, but I realized that I forgot to post the review for the 3rd special, known as the Giggle. So, for that special, I still plan to go back and try to find that and release it. But today, I ended up rewatching the episode The Giggle. I had not seen it in quite a while. I think maybe I watched it twice, maybe once, I'm not sure. I definitely watched scenes from it more than once. But I want to do a revisited review here, because my rewatch, after having spent a lot of time between those two things, having watched it last year in November, and then now I'm watching it this year in nearly April, I wanted to do a revisited review and talk about some of my thoughts having watched it again. So, before I get into this, full spoilers for The Giggle, and pretty much everything that's come after it, which is, I think, only 1 episode, but full spoilers for everything that came before and after The Giggle and New Who. Okay, what did I think about this episode? Surprisingly, I had a very polarized reaction to it in terms of what I thought last time. To sum up, I thought the first half of the episode was significantly worse than I remember it the first time. And I thought the second half of the episode was significantly better. So, just because I'd like to round this out, I'm going to start with the negative, and then I'm going to bring it around to the positive. So in the first half of the episode, why I think this doesn't really work is because, number one, I feel that Neil Patrick Harris has such a good villain energy coming off of him that character feels kind of wasted, because I'm actually a person who really enjoys the original story line of the Toymaker from the 1960s. With the first Doctor, I really like that story, but it is mostly missing because the first 3 episodes of the 4-part story are missing, and you have to rely on audio or animation to get that experience of that story. And because that story is missing, mostly, I was excited to see that character back. And I can't really unsee that with the high expectations. So I understand that a lot of people going into this aren't going to know who the Toymaker is. But even then, I think this character is a very different portrayal than it was the first time. I can totally believe it's the same character because of his obsession with games and how silly he is. I can totally believe that's the same character. But I feel like we never really get enough of a focus on Neil Patrick Harris's character to really have him shine in this kind of story, because there's so much other stuff going on. This is a regeneration story. This is a story that, you've got, Donna, and you've got Unit, and you're seeing the Unit Tower for the first time, and there's this whole thing going on with the world and people thinking they're right, and it just doesn't feel like there's enough space for him to breathe in that moment, or in the whole episode, really. It seems like a kind of character that probably should have been a recurring character. Maybe there should have been like a 3-episode arc where that character is the villain, or had a story that just took place with Donna, the Doctor, and the Toymaker. I think it should have been something like that, because that musical number, Spice Up Your Life, that was really kind of disturbing and fantastic at the same time, and I think it's like more moments like that, like not that the whole episode had to be a musical number or anything, but more moments like that would have been really, really nice to see from that character. The other thing was, the story I thought got a little ridiculous, even for Doctor Who, which is saying a lot, because this whole thing with Stooky Bill being inside every television set from the beginning of time, and how everyone thinks they're right. I think I took issue with that in my last review. Instead of saying something like, everyone goes with their first impulse or something like that, they just say everyone thinks they're right. And it's interesting, because I think that everyone going with their first impulse is actually what's happening, but they're not really describing it that way, so the line just comes off as very cliche and very contrived, and I didn't really like the way that was done. Even changing the wording of that explanation, I think, would have been better. So I do take issue with that. And I'm not the first person to point this out. I think there's a couple other YouTube channels that have basically described it in that way, that everyone goes with their first impulse. You can see that in the way that Kate Stewart attacks people around her. Her first inclination of suspicion is what she goes with. She goes with her gut all the time and the thoughts coming from within. So that is explained there, but I just think the wording was a problem. And then it's going along with the whole thing of the episode feeling disjointed. The whole first half of the episode, I feel just kind of clashes with itself. There's a lot of interesting ideas, and none of them are really done justice. We get that reunion with Mel, which I think is probably the best element that's just kind of stuck in there. It's nice to see Mel, but it would have been nice to get a little bit more of a flashback of who Mel was for people who don't watch classic. I mean, I'm the person who watched a lot of the 6th Doctor and the 5th Doctor, and even I am not really too big on remembering who Mel was. I didn't even remember if she was in the 5th Doctor's era. But I've seen most of the 5th Doctor's era and definitely most of the 6th Doctor's era because I watched all the way through Trial of a Time Lord, which is 14 episodes long. But anyway, that would have been nice to get more of. The whole thing with Unit Tower, that should have been its own thing probably. There should have been one enemy and then had the Unit Tower thing without all these other things in there. And it just felt like the story was underbaked a lot of the time, and it made the dialogue a little bit ridiculous. And then there was that random thing that I know I talked about last time, with the Doctor randomly getting on his colleagues at Unit, being like, oh, the human race, you're so terrible. That's who you are. It just came out of nowhere. It just seemed like the kind of thing that probably could have worked if he was talking to different people in a different script, but it just came off as nasty in this. That's what I mean. It feels kind of like a hodgepodge. It feels all kind of jumbled and mixed up. And while there are some good visuals, like that scene with the toy maker being, having the marionette there, and the guy there, and then the Doctor going, I thought I was clever. Like, that was cool. And then, of course, who could forget Stooky Bill's wife and the little creepy baby doll things? Like, all that was nice. It was nice moments, but unless a story really flows, you can have the best scenes, and it all just doesn't seem to work together. I think the moment where it started coming together a little bit more is when we had the Spice Up Your Life scene, but even then, you have the toy maker outside, and he's sitting on the little laser thing, and it's like, like the laser, it just doesn't feel like we did anything to earn that moment. It was so weird and random, and I just think coupling all that with the random game that was played at the end with the game of Catch It, I don't know, I felt like they should have done something different. They should have pulled out some lightsabers or something, or had something that tied into the story more than the toy maker talking about juggling earlier in the episode, and then it's like, oh, we're playing a game of catch. It just doesn't seem to flow very well. So that's my issue with the first half of the episode. Just not really flowing together very well, not being cut together particularly effectively. Now let's talk about what I like about the second half, because in short, it's two things. It's two words. Ncuti, David. These two actors are so good in the second half. And I have to say this, and I was reluctant to say this before. Guys, I think I'm okay with the bi-generation now. Russell T. Davies, speaking off of the official material, has said every Doctor has bi-generated. Now, that I do not accept because it just doesn't really make sense, and it undercuts a lot of the emotional beats of the story. So I just kind of choose in my own headcanon not to believe that every Doctor bi-generated. But again, that's not Russell T saying, officially, this is what happened. He's just saying, in my mind, every Doctor probably bi-generated. That's fine. I don't accept that. But bi-generation as it appears in the show, I think it really works. And the reason is, David Tennant came back for these specials, which I don't know was a good idea. At first I was saying, well, this is just kind of to give the show a reset. Then I saw what they did, and I wasn't really a huge fan of it, but I still love David Tennant as the Doctor. If you're going to live in that world where there is another David Tennant coming back, giving him a good send-off like that and having Ncuti take over, almost like David is, instead of just regenerating, it's more than that. And I hadn't thought about this before. It's like he's literally passing the torch on to the next person, both behind the scenes and in front of the camera, passing the torch on to the next person playing it, taking a seat, retiring, while the next person takes over. That's essentially what regeneration is, but this is a little bit more than that. Because it's not like the old Doctor keeps living inside of me as a persona element. It's like that Doctor literally is sitting down and retiring and living a happy life, and away steps this new person. And that's kind of what a reboot of the show is. Because if you think about it, Doctor Who Season 1, or Series 1 from 2005, this is the first time we had the Doctor Who revival. While the show definitely continued the lore from the original show, heavily, it's like, it's continuity, they didn't throw anything out. Maybe they threw out some things that were not very cohesive with the rest of it, but they mostly kept classic Who. But the entire style and format of the show changed. So it wasn't really as recognizable. Like, it would take you a minute, unless you saw the TARDIS, to even realize you were still watching Doctor Who, because it's hard to remember a world in which Doctor Who was not the Russell T Davies inspired and started version of Doctor Who. And by the way, I didn't know Doctor Who back then. I'm pretty sure I wasn't even aware of Doctor Who until the revival series, which most people probably weren't here in the States, especially if you're under the age of like 35. You probably weren't aware of it at all. But it's hard to think of the show being like that, but it is different now because Russell T Davies laid down that groundwork, and it's like he's rebooting the show in terms of the number of seasons. Like, we're starting with season 1 again, but he's not actually doing a reboot. It's a soft reboot like we had in 2005. We're starting it with season 1 on Disney+, and it's like that era of the show is handing itself over to this new era of the show, and giving David Tennant just this once, giving him that happy ending where he gets to just sit down and enjoy things. I think that's good. Now, I say just this once. Another gripe I have with it conceptually is that we now have 2 David Tennants, and neither one of them are the current Doctor walking around. It's kind of crazy to think about that. But, and I have to emphasize this, as long as they don't bring David Tennant back, the bi-generation I think is perfect. I seriously, I had trouble with it before. I was actually just talking to a friend of mine about this not too long ago, that I just feel like, before I saw this today, like, I felt like David Tennant was kind of still the Doctor in some form, and that Ncuti Gatwa wasn't really the Doctor. But I don't really feel like that anymore, because I think I've had time since this aired to kind of step away from it and say, you know what? I can see this now. I've already gone through that thing, okay, David's not coming back, and usually the show does that for me, right? Usually the show, you have the old Doctor, and then there's the big flashy regeneration, it's a new Doctor. It's like a mental thing that the show does for you. And the show didn't do that this time, but now I think I've finally put that aside. It's like when a new person takes over anything else in a show that's not Doctor Who. You kind of have to do that, and I'm not used to doing that mental work. And the show didn't do it this time, but I think I finally crossed that hurdle after watching this again. It's like, okay, Ncuti is the Doctor now. BBC, Russell T Davies, Disney+, whoever else, please don't bring back David Tennant again. Please don't. Like, if you're going to bring him back again, wait like 3 seasons and then have him involved in like a one-off episode, not as one of the main Doctors, like not a multi-Doctor story where he's half of the Doctors. He should just be like a character in the show. Like, oh, I used to be the main Doctor, now I'm retired, and I just go off on my TARDIS and do things occasionally, and we bumped into each other, and I'm here, and maybe I'll help you. But not like, don't bring him back as like a multi-Doctor story. I really don't want them to do that. I don't want to sound mean, like, I really like David Tennant, but we've had enough at this point. Not like we don't like him, but we've had our fill of David Tennant being the Doctor, and we need to allow other people. Okay, so, having said all that, Ncuti Gatwa, I did not appreciate at the time, just because I was more apprehensive and I hadn't seen The Church on Ruby Road yet, and I have my issues with that episode, but none of those issues are Ncuti, right? He is instantly charismatic, instantly steps into the role. I didn't appreciate that as much at the time, but just seeing what he's doing with that character and looking back at it, I'm like, oh my goodness, he works right off the bat. Because you have to think about what he's doing. He is coming out of a regeneration that none of us have ever seen before. He's a pioneer in the same way that Patrick Troughton is, kind of. Patrick Troughton was the first person post-regeneration to play the Doctor. Ncuti Gatwa was the first person post-bi-generation to play the Doctor. He has to share the screen with the previous Doctor and with Neil Patrick Harris. And, like, he's just still the most charming person on the screen. He can be tender when he's saying, I've got you. He's very energetic. He's sitting there. He's got that 5 mile grin. He's just so good in that role, and I just didn't appreciate that because I didn't really know what they were doing with him yet. But I just encourage anybody who has seen The Church on Ruby Road and you haven't gone back to look at that, go back and watch this episode and just watch the scene from the time that they bigenerate and just watch the Doctor, Shudigatwa, just chewing up the scenery, just being fantastic in that role. And he has to do it in his underwear. That's the other thing. How are you going to come onto the show as the new Doctor and they don't even give you pants to wear and you're still the most charismatic person on the screen? How do you do that? I have to comment on something here because it's relevant. Not because I just am saying it just to say it. A lot of people, when Shudigatwa was cast, you know the kind of things that they said. Oh, it was a force. It was a mandatory diverse. Look, Russell T Davies, when he cast Shudigatwa, said he cast him because of talent. And if you are looking at this and you can at least see that Russell T Davies saw in Shudigatwa what he wanted to see, I think there's just some prejudice playing there. Not that I'm not saying if you don't like Shudigatwa that you're prejudiced, but to say that kind of thing, I think, for actors, just implies that those actors couldn't get the role on their own merit. It's like they can never win, right? But you have to agree that, like, what Russell T is trying to do in this episode, clearly Shudi is matching up with that, because as soon as he comes into the episode just, it's like it turns around. It gets so much more energy. And I think it becomes so much more enjoyable. Now, a little gripe of something that I think undercut the introduction of Shudi a little bit is having him go into the second TARDIS and having it be almost exactly the same except for like a jukebox. Like, I think when he was like, oh, you get a prize, and he, generated the second TARDIS, he walked in there, it's like, it's the same TARDIS. It's like, that was a little bit underwhelming. It's like, I think at least the color scheme should have been drastically different. He did go in there and change it, but I just think it would have been much more, surprising and much more, kind of awe-inspiring if he would have gone into that second TARDIS, and it would have looked like even just marginally different. Like if the console would have been like a different color, or if the lights would have been doing something funky, or if the floors were like platinum or something, like just something different, right? Something that makes this TARDIS stand out, and you're like, oh, this looks even cooler than the other one, But we didn't get a moment like that, but that's okay. I mean, the second TARDIS is wheelchair accessible. That's a thing. Although I have to say something about the wheelchair accessible thing, like, I get it, I'm glad that the TARDIS is wheelchair accessible, but it's like, I think it's one of those things that is a little bit too contrived, and I say that because, you're telling me that the Doctor, with his machine that can travel anywhere in time and space, if there was a person who needed to get into the TARDIS who had a wheelchair, you're telling me the TARDIS could not have, generated a ramp before? I think it's kind of a thing that the TARDIS... I know the TARDIS is not a real thing, so we can't, actually check because it's a fictional machine, right? But, I don't doubt that the TARDIS could have generated a ramp before. It's kind of like, I'm a person who has a visual impairment, going to the console and it's like, Doctor, you finally put a screen reader in there. It's like, I don't doubt that the TARDIS has the technology to read me buttons if it needs to read me that. It's kind of a weird thing. I would have preferred the Doctor to just, be like, oh, let me help you with that. And then, hit the sonic screwdriver, and then the ramp is just it's like, that seems like the kind of thing that probably would have been better. And even within the show's canon, K9 has gotten into the TARDIS before, and K9 is on wheels, so I know that it's a thing of contention that K9, had to be filmed from the side because there's no way for K9 to actually get into the TARDIS, but I don't know. It's just one of those things that I think, it feels like it's trying a bit too hard when you probably didn't need to do that, but hey, I'm not a wheelchair user. People who are wheelchair users appreciated that, so I'm not taking that away from anybody. So I just wanted to say, it just struck me weird. I just think that, yeah, like I said, I think that probably was something that could have easily been done before, even without the TARDIS literally having a wheelchair ramp right there. But anyway, yeah. And just seeing Shudi at the end, just smiling, and the TARDIS taking off, that's just great. And then the Doctor Who title sequence, I did not appreciate this as much at the time. I didn't appreciate the Doctor Who title sequence, the new one, with the with the breathing and then the weird colors and stuff that kind of look like a visualizer from Windows Media Player. But like, I like it. I like it. It's grown on me, and that's what happens with a lot of media. You just have to give it time to grow on you, and it has. So I appreciate that, and I'm definitely gonna go back probably today and rewatch The Church on Ruby Road, because I can't not do that, right? So, anyway, those are my thoughts on Doctor Who, The Giggle. And I hope that the second time my thoughts were a little bit more thorough. And I don't know the timeline of posting this. I got this video I'm posting, I got the original review of The Giggle, and I got a video I did on audio quality and how to get good audio quality for very cheap if you're starting out on YouTube. So I'm going to be working on those things, but in the meantime, guys, thank you very much. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you next time. Allons-y!